Millions of people argue about who invented jollof rice. Friends joke about it. Families defend it. Entire countries proudly claim it as their own. The debate has become so famous that it even has a name, the Jollof Wars. But what if almost everyone is asking the wrong question? Because the true story of jollof rice does not begin in modern Nigeria. It does not begin in Ghana. And it does not begin in any of the countries that proudly serve it today. Its story begins hundreds of years earlier, in a time when today's borders did not exist. It begins with a powerful African empire that has almost been forgotten, with busy trade routes that carried more than gold and salt, and with people whose ideas traveled farther than their kingdoms ever did. Over time, one simple meal crossed rivers, deserts, and kingdoms. It changed with every journey. New spices were added. Different cooking methods appeared. Each generation made it their own until one dish became many. And as centuries passed, those different versions became symbols of culture, family, and national pride. Today, millions of people proudly say their country's jollof is the original. But history tells a far more surprising story. It is a story of migration instead of rivalry, shared traditions instead of stolen recipes, and forgotten past hidden inside a single name. By the end of this video, you'll discover where jollof rice most likely came from, why so many countries honestly believe it belongs to them, and how one humble pot of rice became one of Africa's greatest cultural treasures, and one of its biggest debates. The truth is far older, far richer, and far more fascinating than most people have ever imagined. The Jollof Wars are more than just funny jokes on social media. They are a battle of pride, tradition, and identity. Ask someone in Nigeria where the best jollof comes from, and many will answer without even thinking. Ask the same question in Ghana, and you will likely hear a very different story. Travel farther west, and Senegal proudly points to its famous dish called thibadayen. Cross into the Gambia, and families will tell you their recipe carries generations of history. In Sierra Leone, many believe their own version deserves just as much respect. Every country has its own flavors, its own cooking style, and its own memories tied to the dish. Grandmothers pass recipes to their children. Families gather around steaming pots during weddings, holidays, and celebrations. For millions of people, jollof is more than food. It is home. That is why the debate has lasted for years. Everyone seems certain that history is on their side. Everyone has a story, a tradition, or an old family recipe that feels impossible to argue against. But historians are not trying to answer the question that fills comment sections and starts friendly arguments at dinner tables. They are not asking, who cooks jollof best? They are asking something much older. Where did the idea of jollof rice first begin? That single question changes everything. It takes us far beyond modern countries and national borders. It leads us into a world where kingdoms rose and fell, where merchants carried more than goods across great distances, and where cultures mixed long before nations we know today were ever created. To find the real answer, we first have to erase today's borders. To find the beginning of the story, we must leave behind a map of modern Africa and travel back more than 700 years. This was a time before Nigeria, Ghana, or Sierra Leone existed as countries. Instead, West Africa was home to great kingdoms that grew rich through trade, farming, and skilled craftsmanship. Across the region, long rivers carried boats filled with people and goods. Great caravans crossed the hot Sahara Desert, bringing salt from the north and carrying gold back across the sand. Busy markets were filled with merchants speaking different languages, sharing ideas as easily as they traded cloth, spices, and metal. Powerful cities rose along these trade routes, becoming places where cultures met and mixed every single day. In this world, food traveled just as people did. A new cooking method could move from one village to another. A spice could cross hundreds of miles. A favorite meal could slowly change as it passed through different hands. Long before anyone drew colonial borders across Africa, recipes were already crossing rivers, kingdoms, and deserts. Far to the west, near the Atlantic coast, lived the Wolof people. They were part of a strong and growing kingdom that would become known as the Jolof Empire. It was respected for its rulers, its trade, and its place in the network that connected much of West Africa. At first, the name may not seem important, but listen closely. Jollof, Jollof, the words sound almost the same. Is that only a coincidence? Or has the name of one of West Africa's greatest empires survived for centuries inside one of its most famous dishes? To answer that question, we need to look more closely at the forgotten empire hidden inside the name itself. Here is the biggest surprise in the entire story. Many historians believe the name Jollof comes from the Jollof Empire, a powerful kingdom that stood in what is now Senegal several hundred years ago. The empire was home to the Wolof people, who built strong trade networks and shared their language and culture across much of West Africa. As traders, travelers, and neighbors spoke the name over time, many experts believe Jollof slowly became Jollof. But that does not mean the Jollof Empire invented the dish in one moment. The real story is much older. Long before Asian rice became common in the region, people in West Africa were already growing their own kind of rice. For thousands of years, farmers planted African rice in wetlands and river valleys. It fed families, supported kingdoms, and became part of daily life. As trade grew, so did the food. Local onions added sweetness. Peppers brought heat. Fresh fish, smoked meat, herbs, and palm oil gave each meal its own rich flavor. Every community cooked with what the land provided. Every generation made small changes. Slowly, a simple rice dish became something richer and more complex. That is why historians do not point to one inventor or one famous cook. Jollof was shaped over centuries by countless hands. It grew as people traveled, traded, married, and shared ideas across West Africa. Like a river, the recipe kept moving while carrying pieces of its past with it. The Jollof Empire may have helped give the dish its name, but the meal itself was the result of many cultures growing together over hundreds of years. That leaves one final mystery. If the story began around a Jollof Empire, how did one regional rice dish spread across half a continent and become a treasured part of so many different nations? The story of Jollof did not spread because one king ordered it or because one empire ruled the whole region. It spread because people were always moving. Merchants traveled along busy trade routes carrying gold, salt, cloth, and spices. Travelers crossed rivers and deserts searching for new opportunities. Families moved to different towns. Marriages joined communities together. Islamic scholars traveled from city to city, sharing knowledge while staying with local families. Along the coast, ships connected ports where people exchanged far more than goods. They also exchanged meals. Recipes travel much like languages. A person learns a favorite dish in one place, carries it somewhere new, and changes it just a little. Another family adds a different spice. A new village uses another cooking pot. A fisherman cooks it with fresh seafood, while people farther inland choose beef or goat instead. One region prefers more peppers. Another adds extra onions. Small changes happen one at a time. After many generations, those small changes become traditions of their own. This is exactly what happened with Jollof. The heart of the dish stayed the same, but every region shaped it to match its own land, climate, and culture. The rice remained, yet the flavors slowly changed from one kingdom to the next. No version was exactly the same, and that was never the goal. The recipe was not copied from one place to another like words written on a page. It evolved. With every journey, every market, every marriage, and every new home, Jollof became a little different while still carrying the memory of where it come from. By the time new borders divided West Africa centuries later, people across the region already loved their own version of the same remarkable dish. And that is exactly why the debate over who owns Jollof became so passionate. As the centuries passed, new borders appeared across West Africa. European colonial powers divided lands that had once been connected through trade, family, and shared traditions. People who had cooked similar meals for generations suddenly found themselves living in different countries with different names. But the recipes stayed. In Nigeria, cooks developed a bold, smoky style filled with rich flavors. In Ghana, careful seasoning and fragrant rice became a source of national pride. Senegal continued to celebrate its own famous rice dishes, closely linked to its long history. In the Gambia, families kept alive recipes passed down through countless generations. Sierra Leone gave the dish its own local touch, while Liberia shaped it with flavors that reflected its own people and history. As time went on, each version became more than a meal. It became a symbol of home. Children grew up believing their family's recipe was the real one. Grandparents taught cooking secrets that were never written down. Holiday tables, weddings, birthdays, and festivals all centered around the same familiar pot of rice. Every bite carried memories of family, celebration, and belonging. That is why the jollof debate is so passionate today. People are not simply defending ingredients. They are defending their history, their culture, their identity. And here is a surprising truth. History does not show one country stealing jollof from another. Instead, it tells the story of a shared tradition that slowly spread across West Africa, changing a little wherever it went. Every nation added its own ideas, its own flavors, and its own memories until each version became something unique. So, perhaps the biggest lesson is this. Nobody stole jollof. Everyone inherited part of its story. That shared history is exactly what makes the dish so powerful, and why the debate continues to this day. Today, the story of jollof is still being written, but the battlefield looks very different. Instead of kingdoms, there are cooking competitions. Instead of trade routes, there are social media posts seen by millions. Food festivals bring together talented chefs, each convinced their country's recipe deserves the crown. Famous musicians, actors, and athletes proudly join the conversation, choosing sides and defending the jollof they grew up eating. Every new debate brings laughter, friendly jokes, and passionate opinions. Yet the argument never truly ends. That is because people are not only defending a plate of rice, they are defending childhood memories of family dinners. They are remembering grandparents who spent hours cooking over a hot fire. They are honoring traditions passed from one generation to the next. Every recipe carries a piece of someone's home, and every family believes its story deserves to be remembered. For many people, saying their country's jollof is the best is another way of saying, this is who we are. That is why the debate has lasted for so many years. It is about identity as much as taste. It is about culture as much as cooking. It is about pride as much as history. In many ways, the Jollof Wars have become larger than the dish itself. A meal that likely began as a shared tradition centuries ago now brings millions of people together in friendly rivalry. It starts conversations across borders, fills festivals with excitement, and reminds the world that food has the power to carry history from one generation to the next. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. Long after the empires disappeared and the borders changed, one simple pot of rice continues to keep their story alive. So, after all the stories, the debates, and the centuries of change, what does history actually tell us? Most historians agree on one important point. The earliest roots of jollof are found in the western part of Africa, where the Wolof people and the Jollof Empire played an important role in the region's history. Many also believe that the name jollof grew from the name Jollof, connecting the famous dish to that powerful kingdom. There is also strong evidence that people in West Africa were growing and cooking rice long before modern countries were created. Over many generations, local ingredients, trade, and new ideas slowly shaped the rice dishes that would later become the many versions of jollof we know today. But not every question has a perfect answer. History does not tell us the exact day jollof was first cooked. It does not name one person who invented it. No ancient recipe has survived to settle the argument forever. Instead, history tells a different kind of story. It shows how people borrowed ideas from their neighbors, changed them to fit their own lives, and passed them on to the next generation. One meal became many. One tradition became part of many cultures. That is why the search for a single owner may never end. The larger truth is that jollof belongs to a shared West African history before it belonged to any modern nation. Long before today's borders were drawn, the people of the region were already connected by trade, family, language, and food. Perhaps that is the real answer to the Jollof Wars. The greatest treasure was never the recipe itself. It was a shared history that allowed it to grow, travel, and become one of Africa's most loved dishes. A simple pot of rice has done something few things in history ever achieve. It survived powerful empires. It crossed rivers, deserts, and coastlines. It outlived kingdoms that once ruled West Africa. It passed through countless hands, changed with every generation, and became one of Africa's greatest cultural symbols. Today, millions of people still proudly argue over who owns jollof rice. The debate fills kitchens, festivals, family gatherings, and social media every single day. But after following its journey through history, perhaps that is no longer the most important question. Maybe the real question is not, who invented jollof? Maybe it is, how did one humble meal bring so many different people together for so many centuries? That may be the greatest miracle of all. One ancient recipe has connected families across West Africa through joy, celebration, and tradition. At the same time, it has inspired one of the friendliest rivalries in the world. Few dishes can claim a story like that. History reminds us that cultures are rarely built alone. They grow through shared ideas, shared journeys, and shared memories. Jollof rice is more than a famous meal. It is proof that history can live on a dinner table, carrying the story of generations with every bite. And perhaps that is why the Jollof Wars will never truly end. Not because people cannot agree, but because every country has added something valuable to a story that began long before today's borders ever existed. History is full of stories like this, where the truth is even more fascinating than the legend. If you enjoyed uncovering the real history behind jollof rice, be sure to subscribe for more untold stories that change the world. And let me know in the comments, after hearing the evidence, which version of jollof would you want to try first, and why. Until next time, thanks for watching.